Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Absolute bombshell news coming out tonight as Nick Saban, the GOAT of college football, retiring after a absolutely magical run at the Alabama Crimson Tide. They'll want to talk about a few different things. One, discuss where Alabama sits in terms of being, where do you put it as a head coaching job across the country? Talk about some potential candidates, and then talk about the ripple effect that we're going to see. You're going to see coaches on the move. You're going to see players on the move. It's going to be a wild next couple of weeks. Couldn't have picked a worse night for the boys to be at a family dinner. Dylan and I got notifications on our phone. Couldn't focus on the dinner. Had a lot on our minds. We're going to be talking a little bit about it right now. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. There has been just an overwhelming amount of support the last couple of weeks as we're talking transfer portal, high school recruiting. Cannot thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, everyone's got a take on this. One, I want to hear how you view this Alabama head coaching job. And then two, and more importantly, who do you think is the new head coach in Tuscaloosa? Dylan, I'm going to give you the T-box here. Nick Saban retire and how we feel.
I mean, I think why this is going to be such like a seismic wave through college football is he didn't really leave an heir apparent. And you've seen guys like Bobby Bowden leave Jimbo Fisher behind, very much the heir apparent. Ryan Day and Urban Meyer, when Urban Meyer decided it was time for him to step down, he had that kind of guy to keep everything going. Alabama, I mean, he just kind of left. There really isn't anyone on staff who makes any sense, I think, to take that job. In what I mean, you're going to get probably a lot of talent turnover and guys hitting the portal, but also every coach is kind of on the clock now. If you're at a big school and you like where you're at, I mean, I think Alabama, they can call everyone. And again, I don't think they can necessarily land everybody because as much as Alabama's been the pinnacle of college football, I don't think it's fair to take that away from Nick Saban and say he was a product of Alabama. At the end of the day, this little run, or not little run, but big run Alabama's put on, it was a product of Nick Saban being the best to ever do it.
All right. There's one thing I want to ask you a question of. Do you think there's not an heir apparent? Do you think there's not a successor here in this plan? Because I would be, quite frankly, very surprised if Nick Saban hasn't thought this through. I would be extremely surprised for Nick Saban to know he was retiring and not know who is going to be taking this next head coaching job. I think they have somebody in mind. I think we're going to find that out over the next couple of days. But Dill, I think you make a really good point, right? You look at On3 and 24/7 Sports and ESPN, and they're putting out the hot boards for Alabama, and they're naming the premier coaches in the sport, right? Dan Lanning at Oregon, Mike Norvell at Florida State. You saw Ryan Day at Ohio State, Dabo Swinney at Clemson.
They could call Kirby Smart, and they could probably call him, but I mean, George does a great job in the tone right.
I don't think Kirby Smart's picking up the phone, brother. You look at what Kirby Smart's building at Georgia, that is something special. But I'll ask you the question here, and we'll get into some of the candidates that popped into our mind. Dan Lanning, and this is just more of the conversation of like Alabama's an A-tier job. There's no question about that. It's at the top of the list. But where college football is at right now, is Alabama the program because they just had the best head coach there for the last decade and a half, or is it the best program because it's the best program? And I think a lot of people are leaning Alabama is the program that we view it as right now because they've had the best coach of all time running that program the last couple of years. I'll ask you this. I think Dan Lanning is a perfect example. And if you were to ask me, and I was the AD of Alabama, you said you could hire any coach that you wanted to. Kirby Smart would be one, but I don't think he's going to be taking the job at Alabama. But two would probably be Dan Lanning. And what he's cooking up in Eugene, Dill, is Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning's probably picking up the phone. Is Dan Lanning leaving Eugene to go to Tuscaloosa?
I'm not saying he couldn't do it because, Alabama's they're right at the top of the mountain in terms of jobs. The issue is I think Oregon kind of is right up there too. I think Texas is right up there. I think there's a handful of schools, LSU very much right up there. Again, I think Alabama separated themselves from the pack because of Nick Saban. But you look before Nick Saban and in between the Bear Bryant era, it's not like they were winning every year like they did under those two coaches. And there's a reason. Those two coaches were really, really good coaches and were super successful. But you kind of look at what Dan Lanning would have to do. He'd kind of need to essentially be starting over. Sarkisian, same thing. He'd need to, in a sense, be starting over because as much as Nick Saban's put it together, I mean, with the transfer portal and how things will go, There's going to be a ton of player turnaround. And again, those two coaches, I'm thinking like those feel like the two names that are bubbling up,
Yep.
Sark and Lanning. I mean, those two kind of have it rolling, or at least it seems like they have it rolling. They're really recruiting well, and both of them had very good seasons. So it doesn't feel to me like it's completely obvious that those two would drop everything, take the Alabama job.
I 100% agree. And in the NIL era, like both Texas and Oregon have a very, very large backing.
Yeah,
And I'd argue that in the NIL era with Philly Knight over at Oregon, like that is one of the premier jobs across the country. And then moving to the Big Ten, you talk about Dan Lanning and Coach Sark. I think those are two perfect examples of two coaches that are going to be at the top of the list. But Dill, I mean, in the next 5 years, I've been saying this time and time again, like Oregon and Texas, those are teams I'm buying stock in. I mean, they're trending up in the right direction. You look at some of the classes that Coach Sark has brought in, what this team's going to look like in 2024, saying the exact same thing for Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks.
Which schools, two schools that could were big revenue schools. There's a reason they moved to the big kind of Power 2 conferences is they were in schools where they were the water carriers. They were the only schools producing revenue in the Pac-12 and Big 12 respectively. Now they're in conferences with the SEC. Obviously, every school I feel like makes a lot of money. And then moving into the Big Ten, you have your Michigans, you have your Ohio States, you have your Penn States, big power brands that command big money when you go to the TV bargaining chip or table. Like those two schools put themselves in much better positions than I think they were 2 years ago when they were, again, the two teams essentially that were kind of running their conference. And there wasn't that next blue blood big dog within it.
No, I'm going to put you on the spot here, and I'm going to ask you if Nick Saban, I truly believe Nick Saban has a successor in mind. I really don't think he's going to leave this program and just, hey, back off. Like Coach K at Duke, when Coach K left Duke, like they knew who was taking over that job. I think Nick Saban has somebody in mind. Though I'm going to ask you, if you had to get in Nick Saban's head here, who do you think it's going to be?
I mean, it feels like Kiffin to me.
I was thinking the same thing.
And frankly, I think that's one of the jobs that you might be leveling up a little bit. And I think Ole Miss is a really good job. You kind of see what he's going to have in 2024, which is what makes me think it's not going to be him, because it looks like he thinks he's going to have a crack at it next year at Ole Miss. And again, like you inherit Alabama. It's a great, great job, but you still then are going to need to rebuild it and build it back up. I think it's Kiffin just because that it feels like those two had a good relationship and he almost like went to Ole Miss to come back to Alabama at some point. I don't know. I mean, that's like just like connecting dots. And I feel like I'm riding a bit of the media wave that feels like it's saying it. I really don't think it's going to be Kiffin at the end of the day. But if you ask me who the natural heir apparent would have been, if it was anyone, I think it's Kiffin.
I think it could be Lane. That's who I would think. And you almost see it's like Lane is modeling his like behavior after Nick Saban when he's at the podium. Like he looks like Nick Saban Jr. Now he's mouthing off on Twitter and doing his thing in social media. That's certainly that ain't Nick Saban. That one would make a lot of sense. I think Coach Sark would make a lot of sense at Texas, but Dill, I'm putting myself in Coach Sark's shoes in kind of a similar conversation we had with Dan Lanning at Oregon. And I'll ask you this question. You're Coach Sark. You're at Texas. You have Arch Manning in the chamber. You have Quinn Ewers coming back in 2024. Like, are you leaving Texas, especially in the NIL era, to take over this Alabama head coaching job?
I'm just not sure why you necessarily would, because again, he's taken now 3 years to build that program up.
Yes.
It looks like it's finally kind of coming together. I don't see Texas as like a step down or up really from Alabama. Yeah. It's like when you break your tiers off, there's Ohio State, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Oregon might be working their way into there. And
I think Oregon's there 100%. I think Dan Lanning wants to stay. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of hope he stays. He's doing his thing in Eugene, and I think I'm really high on that program. The one that I keep circling back to is one, Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss, because that is Ole Miss is probably in a tier below. And I think Lane Kiffin obviously spent a lot of time with that program, has a very close relationship with Nick Saban. That one would make a lot of sense. Dill, I'm going to ask you, if you're the Alabama AD and say Dan Lanning's Coach Sark, they don't pick up the phone, where are you going to?
I'll give you two guys who I actually think make a lot of sense. One, I think Marcus Freeman makes some sense at Notre Dame. Notre Dame's I'm not sure that's right up there with Alabama in today.
There's a reason Brian Kelly left. Let's just be frank.
100%. So I think he makes sense. I mean, the Tommy Rees hire, it was a little odd at the time. It was weird that he came out and he almost made it like he was the guy. I don't think anyone thought Tommy Rees as the offensive coordinator guy. It was like Grubbs and some of these other guys from these schools that were scoring some points. So he went out and did it. I think he makes a little bit of sense. And that's a little bit of like jet plane tracking when you're looking at the numbers and saying, ooh, where was the plane? Was it in Michigan State? Was it in East Lansing? Was it in Ann Arbor? What? But I do think Marcus Freeman makes some sense. And I mean, Kalen DeVore is the obvious one because, again, probably a notch a little bit below where Alabama is as a program, but a coach who's just now proven that he is an absolute winner wherever he goes.
Kalen DeBoer is a hammer. And I think there's some questions about, all right, how does that look taking over? I mean, this is a Ferrari of a program. That would be an interesting hire that I could get behind. I've seen some Jimbo Fisher ones. That would be,
Said that? Yes.
No.
That's feasible.
Sell us on Jimbo Fisher, buddy.
It's hard because the times at Texas A&M.
It's hard because it's a bad hire.
Listen to his interview on Pardon My Take. Very likable guy, as much as I think people maybe think he's not. I thought he was really, really interesting to hear. I like listening to it. And I do think he gets like a bit of a bad rap. I mean, they were really good in 2020. I don't know. I just think like what I saw him do at Florida State, he can coach. I don't know what happened.
Florida State was have one of the most talented teams in college football that you couldn't screw up. Like he had the talent at Texas A&M. He screwed it up every single year. Like Jimbo Fisher is not the guy. He didn't
get his quarterback at Texas A&M. That's probably fair, but I don't know. The guy can really, really recruit. I think he can coach.
He can't coach. Okay.
He won a national title. No one's won a national title besides Nick Saban, Kirby, and Dabo.
Yeah, but Dill, with the mismanagement that happened at Texas A&M, the stuff you heard about what was happening in that locker room at Texas A&M.
I think a lot of that's like people coming out of the mud to just belittle a guy who, I mean, he was easy. You could take your shots at him. It was a good time to do it. I just can't. I mean, I don't know how much to read into that. Okay.
I guess I'll put you in there. So you're the AD of the Alabama program, and you're gonna go hire a failed head coach at Texas A&M to take over this program. I struggle to see it. Now, I'm really interested. I want to talk more about the ripple effect too, because you're gonna see.
Wait, who are your guys though?
I mean, I said what I'm going after is Lane Kiffin 1. Which is weird because Lane Kiffin seems like he's gearing up. It almost seemed like, okay, I expect Nick Saban to be here for one more year. I'm going to gear up for 2024, make the college football playoffs, then I'm off to the Alabama Crimson Tide. That's what it seemed like for Lane Kiffin.
Lane beat him.
Yeah. And then Dan Lanning, again, if you ask me and I'm an AD and I could get any head coach in the country, it'd be Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning. Those are my two guys. Like that's who I would be going after. Again, whether Dan Lanning picks up the phone or not, that's a question. I want to talk about the ripple effect that we're going to see. You already saw 5-star wide receiver Ryan Williams decommit from Alabama. We'll talk about that tomorrow morning, potentially going to Auburn. I feel like that's the obvious pick here. I think you're going to see a lot of players hit the transfer portal because you look at it, Dill. You commit to Alabama, you're committing to Nick Saban. So, one, you're going to see a ton of talent. They got the 30-day window for guys to hit the transfer portal. I would expect to see a lot of guys hit the transfer portal, test their name on the market, but more importantly, from a coaching carousel standpoint. I mean, there is going to be a massive move in terms of a head coach leaving a big program to come to Alabama. You're going to see coordinators on the move. Dill, we're going to be extremely busy talking about not only the players on the move, but a lot of head coaches, right? The ripple effect here is, okay, a little hypothetical here. Dan Lanning takes a job at Alabama. Now Oregon's got to hire someone. Oregon makes a flash hire. And then someone else has got to hire. You're going to see a lot of coaches, coordinators on the move. It's going to be like this doesn't only affect Alabama. This affects the college football landscape nationally.
And I think that ultimately stems from the fact that he doesn't have a coordinator who's taking that job. Obviously Kevin Steele retired. He clearly knew Nick Saban was retiring too. And it's not going to be Tommy Rees. There's no world that he ultimately gets this head coaching job, not having really done it. So that's why it's going to create so much chaos. Because again, we've kind of seen these big time coaches, Bob Stoops, Urban Meyer, Bobby Bowden, like those guys who kind of retired on the job, who were so good that you could never fire them. They always had an heir apparent. They had Jimbo, Ryan Day, like they had the guy waiting in the wings, and Nick Saban, he just doesn't have it. I know you kind of said you think they have it, but it's not coming from inside the walls of Brian Denny land.
That's the most interesting part about it. And that's why it's going to shake up. This isn't just a promote from within. This is going to shake up a lot of coaching staffs, a lot of personnel departments. Because
they can call anyone. I'm not saying everyone will take the job,
but
they can give everyone a call.
And most coaches are going to pick up the phone. Again, I think there's probably one coach in the country, and that's Kirby Smart, who wouldn't pick it up. That's Kirby Smart's got the pinnacle job right now in college football.
He's also the man.
We'll see. I want one. I need this. Because Dylan and I spent about an hour at dinner arguing about this. One, need tier rankings. Need everybody to drop in the comments like how you rank these teams. Give us that. We'll talk about it. And then coaching candidates. And we'll chop it up in the comment section. This is going to
the problem is it's everybody.
It's everybody, but give us your best fits. And we'll be on there in the comment section talking about it again. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Had to hop on. Sorry we are late on the call. This was a tough night to be at dinner, and the boys were miserable the rest of the night. Appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.